A dream. It always began the same way, quietly, almost peacefully, like any other dream. Miles Irwin stood at the edge of a vast, barren landscape. The earth was no longer the blue and green marble he had known all his life. Instead, it was an expanse of crackling energy, fissures running deep across the ground. The sky was an unnatural red, swirling with dark clouds, as though it too had begun to burn. There was no wind, no sound, only the rumbling vibrations that seemed to shake the very core of the planet. He watched helplessly as the world around him crumbled. The cities he had known, the landscapes he had grown up with, all swallowed by the insatiable fires that consumed them from within. The air burned with the smell of ash, and the ground beneath his feet cracked open like a wound. But what terrified him the most was the fact that he wasn't alone. People, familiar faces, were standing next to him, but they were not afraid. They simply watched as the end came. Their eyes were hollow, their faces frozen in an eerie, blank stare. Then the world erupted. He always woke up at the same moment, gasping for air, his chest heaving with panic. Sweat clung to his skin, his heart pounding in his ears. The sense of doom that lingered after each dream was undeniable. Miles couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a nightmare. It felt like a premonition, a warning of something far worse to come. But try as he might, he couldn't make sense of it. Years later, years passed since the dreams began. Miles, ever the driven scientist, buried himself in his work. His mind, always restless, sought solutions to the questions that haunted him, the limitations of the human body, the fragility of existence. As he delved deeper into the mysteries of consciousness, the idea of transcending the body became his obsession. What if the mind could be liberated from its physical constraints? What if the soul could escape its prison and drift freely through the cosmos, unbound by flesh or bone? This was the birth of the Solace Engine, a machine designed to separate the mind from the body, to extract consciousness into a pure, formless energy. With this breakthrough, humanity could transcend its mortal limitations. No longer would the mind be tethered to its fragile vessel. The potential for exploration, for growth, was limitless. And yet, a strange sense of unease gnawed at him. He couldn't deny the nagging thought that there was something wrong, something he had overlooked. But the pull of his ambition was too strong. The Solace Engine was a masterpiece of design. It consisted of two large rotating wheels, one inside the other. The outer wheel turned steadily, feeding energy into the machine, while the inner wheel rotated in the opposite direction, manipulating the neural currents. The body sat in the center, tethered to the core, while the machine powered up, preparing to separate the mind from the flesh. Miles was on the verge of completing the Solace Engine. The final prototype sat before him, humming with energy. It was a machine unlike anything the world had ever seen, a blend of quantum physics and neurobiology that could achieve the impossible. The first test was meant to be routine, a demonstration of the machine's power. Evelyn, his longtime colleague and close friend, stood in the observation room, watching nervously as Miles prepared for the procedure. She had been with him from the beginning, helping him refine the design, pushing him to consider every possible consequence. But even she could sense the tension in the air. She had warned him time and time again that tampering with the human mind in such a radical way could have unforeseen consequences. "You're sure about this?" she asked, her voice crackling through the intercom. Miles didn't respond immediately. His gaze was fixed on the machine, the Solace Engine, now fully powered and ready to activate. The final prototype sat before him, humming with energy. This was the moment he had worked for, the moment that would change everything. "I'm ready," he finally said, his voice steady, but the words felt hollow. A flicker of doubt passed through his mind, but he brushed it aside. Evelyn's voice trembled slightly as she spoke again. "Just be careful. We don't know what's on the other side." But Miles was already strapping himself into the harness, his hands moving with mechanical precision as he activated the machine. The large, gleaming metal contraption sprang to life. Lights flashed across the control panels, and the humming grew louder. "Solace Engine online," the machine's AI declared in a cold, impersonal voice. As the energy surged through the circuits, Miles felt the strange pull in his mind, the sensation of his consciousness separating from his body. It wasn't painful. On the contrary, it was like waking up from a dream, as if he were lifting himself out of his own skin. His body went limp, but his mind remained fully aware, floating freely in the vast space of energy created by the machine. The sensation was exhilarating. He felt light, weightless, no longer bound by the physical limitations of his body. There was no pain, no hunger, no fatigue. He was free. The first thing he did was rise, his consciousness soaring up through the air, above the lab, above the city, until Earth appeared below him like a fragile blue orb. His breath, if it could still be called breath, caught in a moment of awe. The Earth, the home he had known all his life, now seemed so small, distant. But he was immune to the conditions of space. No need for air, no need for protection. He could exist outside of time and space, and he could observe everything. From Earth, he flew onward. He passed the moon, gliding effortlessly past its craters before arriving at Mars. Its red surface loomed beneath him, vast and barren, but he could feel the pull of its history, the echoes of long-dead worlds. He moved onward, past the gas giants, towards Saturn, marveling at its rings as they danced around him. He couldn't touch them, couldn't interact with them, but that didn't matter. He didn't need to. He was an observer, a silent witness to the majesty of the universe. He couldn't get tired. He couldn't be affected by the harshness of space. He was at peace, as if he had finally unlocked the true freedom of the mind. The sense of wonder, of pure exploration, overwhelmed him. This was what he had dreamed of. This was what he had fought for. Eventually, he knew it was time to return. His journey had shown him the unimaginable, and now it was time to share it. With a thought, he began to drift back, his consciousness returning to the lab, to his body. The machine hummed down as Miles's consciousness re-entered his body. He blinked as his mind settled back into his physical form, and he could feel his senses return to normal: weight, touch, the pulse of his heart. The world was no longer vast and infinite, but it felt more alive than ever. Evelyn was the first to greet him as he sat up, her face a mix of awe and disbelief. "Miles, you came back." He grinned, unable to hide his excitement. It worked. It really worked. He was practically glowing as he described everything he had experienced. The freedom, the wonder of flying through space, the peace that came with being no longer tied to the physical body. He spoke of the Earth seen from afar, of Mars, of Saturn's rings, of the feeling of pure observation without interference. It was everything he had imagined, and more. Evelyn's eyes widened. "That's incredible. But how are you feeling? Any side effects? Any, I don't know, lingering effects?" Miles laughed, a sound full of joy. "I feel amazing. It's like nothing I've ever felt before. No pain, no fear, just peace." He stood, eager to share the news with the rest of the team. As he walked out of the room, he could see their stunned faces, his colleagues, the engineers, all of them silent, waiting for the confirmation of the machine's success. "It's real," he said, his voice ringing with the weight of his words. "It works. We've done it." The government, the scientific community, the entire world would soon hear about the Solace Engine. Miles's discovery would change the course of human history. The potential for humanity to transcend the physical body, to live as pure consciousness, free to explore the universe, was now within reach. The Solace Engine had succeeded, and with it, the future had been unlocked. The world was on the cusp of a new era. With the Solace Engine, they had discovered a way to break free from the confines of the physical body, to travel the cosmos not through ships or machines, but through the mind. The very concept of space travel was redefined. No longer did humanity need to invest in massive, fuel-hungry spaceships or face the danger of radiation, gravity, or the complexities of survival in outer space. All that was required now was the Solace Engine, a machine that allowed one's consciousness to break free, to traverse the far reaches of the galaxy without ever leaving the safety of Earth. The initial tests had been exhilarating. Miles's groundbreaking experience had proven that it was possible. But as the project gained global attention, the possibilities became even more enticing. Now, the world had a new dream. If one could experience space travel without the limitations of the human body, then the universe was truly within reach. The wealthy, the elite, and the privileged were the first to seize the opportunity. They paid astronomical sums to be able to leave their bodies behind, to transcend their mundane lives and journey to the stars, to witness galaxies, nebulae, and planets far beyond their comprehension. It wasn't just scientists and astronauts anymore. It was anyone with enough money who wanted to feel the thrill of interstellar exploration. And the results were extraordinary. Thousands of people embarked on their own journeys into space, seeing what had once been only a dream. Some felt a sense of wonder, others a sense of terror, but all felt the intoxicating allure of freedom, the call to leave behind their earthbound lives. Yet, with the growing number of users came growing problems. It started with small, isolated incidents. People would return to their bodies after long journeys, only to find that something was wrong. Their hearts would stop for a moment. A strange stillness would take over them. They'd be revived, but the incident would be brushed off as a side effect, a glitch in the machine. But as the months went on, the incidents became more frequent. Soon, it became clear that something darker was at play. 1 out of every 10 people who used the Solace Engine experienced a fatality upon returning to their body. Their consciousness, having wandered too far from their physical form, couldn't re-anchor itself properly. Their bodies rejected them, and their hearts, unable to cope with the strain, stopped. It wasn't just a freak occurrence anymore. It was a pattern. Evelyn, ever the cautious one, was the first to sound the alarm. As the chief scientist overseeing the project, she had seen firsthand how people return from these journeys, shaken, disoriented, but mostly alive. But now, with deaths becoming a regular occurrence, she began to question whether the machine was too powerful. Had they created something that went beyond their control? Miles, on the other hand, had already detached himself from the ethical concerns. Miles looked at Evelyn. "What is death compared to what this machine has achieved?" he asked, his voice calm. "The mind is free now beyond the limits of our bodies. Even heaven isn't out of reach." His words echoed in the sterile laboratory, hanging in the air like a dark omen. Evelyn recoiled, her stomach twisting with unease. The world had transformed since the inception of the Solace Engine. What began as a machine designed to push the boundaries of human knowledge had become the key to an entirely new era. Society had evolved rapidly, and the course of history had altered forever. The engine, once thought to be a mere technological marvel, had become the linchpin of an unimaginable leap forward for humankind. The Solace Engine had bridged the gap between humanity and the stars. With its ability to peer into distant galaxies and even cross vast stretches of time, scientists, now a new breed of explorers, had uncovered phenomena that were once considered impossible. They had discovered new stars, galaxies, and even wormholes. Humanity was no longer bound by Earth. It was now a part of the cosmos. The Solace Engine's true potential had been realized through the data it accumulated. The machine gathered information at an unprecedented rate, instantly processing vast amounts of data from distant stars, black holes, and even the boundaries of the universe itself. Scientists could map galaxies with pinpoint accuracy, predict supernova years before they occurred, and chart intergalactic paths that would once have taken millennia to traverse. Diseases were eradicated with precise genetic engineering. Fuel sources were unlocked from deep within the planets, and the Earth was healed through advancements that had previously been the stuff of fiction. Social structures had also evolved. The once mighty nations had become smaller, more interconnected. Power was no longer measured by armies or wealth, but by knowledge and the ability to harness the Solace Engine's capabilities. The lines between space exploration, AI research, and human consciousness had blurred, creating a world that operated as one unified organism, an entity striving toward the unknown, unburdened by the constraints of human history. The Solace Engine wasn't just a tool anymore. It was the foundation of a new human identity. As time passed, Miles couldn't resist the allure of one more journey. Despite the warnings, the incidents, and Evelyn's constant pleas for caution, he believed he was immune to the failures others experienced. After all, he was the creator of the Solace Engine, the one who understood its intricacies better than anyone else. If there was a flaw, he would find it, and if there wasn't, he would prove it. One night, alone in the lab, Miles prepared for what would be his final voyage. Strapping himself into the harness, he felt a rush of anticipation mixed with dread. The hum of the machine was almost soothing, a lullaby for the restless mind. He activated the sequence, his hands trembling slightly as the lights of the Solace Engine danced across the room. The sensation was instantaneous and familiar, the unraveling of his mind from his body, the release of all earthly limitations. He ascended once more, his consciousness soaring beyond the confines of the lab, the city, the planet. The stars welcomed him, a symphony of light and sound that only he could hear. Beyond the edge of the Milky Way, he found himself in unfamiliar galaxies, their stars blazing in unfamiliar patterns. He marveled at his creations, worlds that seemed to dance and pulse with life, molded by the intricate beauty of the universe's natural laws. Time became meaningless as he wandered, his mind a silent observer to the wonders of the cosmos. Days, perhaps weeks, passed as he moved from one galaxy to the next, watching stars flicker and die, witnessing the silent birth of nebulas, and feeling the immense scale of existence itself. The journey was overwhelming in its beauty and enormity, a testament to his machine's triumph. Eventually, the pull of his body became an anchor, tugging at his thoughts. With a sense of quiet satisfaction, Miles willed himself to return, retracing his path across the galaxies. The familiar warmth of Earth called to him, and soon the glow of the Solace Engine filled his vision. He could feel the lab drawing closer, the hum of his body resonating like a beacon. But something was wrong. As he neared the precipice of merging with his physical form, a sudden, agonizing force yanked him backward. His mind recoiled in pain, a terrible fissure of white-hot agony splitting through his thoughts. His heart, his real beating heart, lurched, and then stopped. A dreadful silence followed. Miles opened his eyes, or what he thought were eyes. He was in the lab, yet something was different. His body lay before him, lifeless on the platform. Researchers swarmed around it, Doctor. Aveline's frantic voice rising above the chaos. Clear. Charging again. No response. Miles reached out instinctively, but his hand passed through the console like mist. Panic welled inside him. He tried to scream, to force some connection, but his efforts only deepened his sense of isolation. I'm not in my body. His body lay motionless in the chamber, Evelyn kneeling beside it, her face buried in her hands. The room was filled with an oppressive silence, broken only by the occasional hum of the machine that had failed her. Evelyn, his voice trembling. I'm here, I'm right here. But no one heard him. No one even looked in his direction. He reached out to touch Evelyn's shoulder, but his hand passed through her like mist. Panic surged within him. He spun around trying to find something, anything, that could make his presence known. But the truth was undeniable. He was still here, yet utterly invisible, intangible, and alone. It was then that he realized the truth. He wasn't dead, and if he wasn't dead, neither were the others who had vanished. But why hadn't they warned him? Why hadn't he seen them? The answer hit him like a physical blow. When the mind's connection to the body failed, it changed. The energy that remained was no longer entirely human. It was something new, a unique form of consciousness. Each individual became isolated in their transformation, invisible to both the living and the dead. Miles screamed. He was alive, yet utterly alone, trapped as a silent observer. Evelyn sat alone in the control room, staring at the now silent Solace Engine. The facility, once alive with the hum of discovery, now felt like a mausoleum. Miles's absence was palpable. She had watched his heart cease its rhythm, his brilliance extinguished, and yet she couldn't shake the feeling he was still there. The whispers began softly at first. She chalked them up to exhaustion or grief. But as the days passed, Evelyn clenched her fists, her mind a battleground of guilt and resolve. Every voice that called out to her felt like an accusation. She could almost see their faces, those who died due to the machine. Late one night, as the project went offline for maintenance, Evelyn made her decision. The facility was eerily quiet as she entered the server room. She stared at the central hub, the beating heart of the Solace Engine. For a moment, she hesitated, memories flashing before her. Miles's smile as he described the engine's potential, the awe in the eyes of the first explorers who returned with tales of the cosmos. But then came the faces of the dead, their eyes vacant, their lives cut short. This has to end, she murmured. With trembling hands, Evelyn initiated the purge. She set fire to the physical blueprints, one after another, until the flames consumed years of work. The servers followed next, wiped clean of every trace of the Solace Engine's design. Smoke filled the room, stinging her eyes and lungs, but she didn't stop until nothing remained but ash. He had followed her, invisible and untethered, a silent witness to her destruction. His energy form floated above her as the flames devoured his life's work. He wanted to scream, to stop her, to explain why the project mattered. Yet, as the inferno grew, a strange emotion took hold of him. A bittersweet acceptance. Yes, lives had been lost, but the Solace Engine had also unlocked the stars. Humanity had achieved what it couldn't have dreamed of in millennia of exploration through physical means. They had transcended the weaknesses of the flesh, stepping into an age of enlightenment. The knowledge they had gathered, maps of galaxies, even the discovery of life itself, had catapulted them to the brink of becoming a first-level civilization. It was worth it, he told himself. But as the days stretched into weeks, a new unease began to gnaw at him. At first, he dismissed it as guilt or loneliness, but the feeling deepened. He floated through the cosmos, revisiting the wonders he had once marveled at. Planets of molten glass, stars on the verge of collapse. He even dared the edges of black holes, letting their immense gravity distort his form into ribbons of energy before snapping back into place. And yet, he could not escape a single question. When will this end? He thought of his father, long gone, and how he had dreamed of reuniting with him in some otherworldly plane. Death had seemed inevitable, even comforting. But now, he realized the truth. His energy form was not bound by time. It did not age, did not decay, and, most horrifying of all, could not die. In desperation, he pushed himself further. He threw himself into the heart of supernovae, let himself be consumed by the crushing forces of neutron stars. He journeyed to the very edge of the universe, to places where matter and time seemed to unravel. Each time, he braced for oblivion, for the release that never came. He was eternal. The realization hit him with a cold finality. No matter where he went or what he did, he would remain, a consciousness adrift in the endless void. Seeking solace, Miles returned to Earth. He floated above the quiet streets of Evelyn's hometown, the place she had retreated to after ending the Solace project. She lived alone now, her once bright eyes dulled by years of grief and regret. He found her sitting on the porch of her small house, staring at the stars. The sight brought a pang of longing. He drifted closer, hovering near her as Evelyn nursed a cup of coffee. "Evelyn," he whispered, his voice lost to the wind. She shifted, glancing over her shoulder as though sensing something. But when she saw nothing, she sighed and looked away. Miles stayed by her side, watching her live out her days in quiet solitude. Though he could not touch her or speak to her, he took comfort in her presence. But deep inside, the horror lingered. As Evelyn grew older, her hair graying and her hands trembling, he remained unchanged. When she was gone, he would still be there, watching over a world that would one day forget him entirely. One evening, as Evelyn sat in the dim light of her porch, her fingers clutched the mug of coffee more out of habit than need. Miles found himself questioning why he even stayed. What was left for him here? What could be gained from clinging to the past, to someone who would never know he was still there? The stars above twinkled, indifferent to his plight, a cosmic reminder that time moved on, and he did not. He had transcended the need for companionship, for connection, yet he longed for it. The eternal loneliness gnawed at him once again. He ventured outward once more, seeking something, anything to fill the void. Perhaps he could discover a new world, a new purpose, or even other beings who had reached this state like him. But no matter how far he traveled, how many new wonders he witnessed, the emptiness followed him. At first, Miles's existence was sustained by a sense of purpose. He told himself that even in death, he was a sentinel of humanity's achievements. He lingered near Evelyn, his only tether to a world that now felt out of reach. Watching her age brought a pang of sorrow, but it also brought a strange comfort. Her life reminded him of what it meant to be human. When Evelyn died, he felt the first true sting of his immortality. Her absence left a void no accomplishment could fill. Yet the world moved on without her, and so did he, floating through the currents of time as humanity thrived. But as the decades turned into a century, the stars he had once adored became painfully familiar. For the first time, he asked himself a question he would come to dread. Why am I still here? The first century had been a blur of wonder, excitement, and discovery. Miles had watched humanity reach heights once thought impossible. Their inventions were like seeds planted in a vast fertile ground, each one blossoming into new possibilities. But now, after the passing of time, the once radiant hope that the future would be even brighter began to dim. 200 years passed, and he had seen the faces of many who once held him in high regard, watched as their lives were snuffed out, one by one. The children of those who had pioneered the early stages of the Solace Engine began to age and die, leaving behind only the memories of their forebears. As the century turned, Miles realized that the weight of eternity was too much for him to bear. He had once believed in the value of knowledge, the idea that to learn more, to uncover the secrets of the universe, was the ultimate purpose. But as the cycles of human life repeated themselves, as he watched the same mistakes and triumphs played out over and over, that belief was slowly being eroded. The novelty of discovery, once exhilarating, now felt like a hollow echo of a past life. His mind, sharp as ever in his current state, started to drift. Where before he had clung tightly to his humanity, now he began to detach, floating further and further from the world he had once known. The immortality he had been granted felt more like a prison now. The humans he had once worked with, the colleagues who had celebrated the success of the Solace Engine with him, were gone. Their children had grown old, their grandchildren had been born and died, and Miles remained untouched by the march of time. He wasn't alive in the way they had been. He was something else, something far removed from the natural order. His existence had shifted. He wasn't part of the world anymore. He was a spectator, watching from the shadows as everything he had once fought for, everything that had once filled him with purpose, began to wither. At first, he tried to immerse himself in the beauty of the universe, visiting new galaxies, seeking new life forms. Yet every discovery felt like a reminder of his isolation. The endless stretch of space, once breathtaking, now seemed vast and cold, indifferent to his suffering. The stars, once the symbols of hope guiding the way forward, became distant and hostile, burning with a cold fire that only emphasized the emptiness of his existence. And the silence, the crushing, suffocating silence. He couldn't speak. No one could hear him. He was completely alone, cut off from any kind of connection. There were no voices to soothe him, no touch to remind him that he had once been human. Every whispered memory of the past grew more and more distorted, like a fading radio signal lost to static. But then came the voices. At first, they were subtle, whispers that seemed to drift through the cosmos, impossible to place. Soft, mournful murmurs that called to him. He didn't recognize them at first, but over time, he began to understand. These voices, these whispers in the dark, were not his. They were the voices of those who had died before him, those who had once been explorers, just like him. Souls lost in the void of their own creation, now doomed to wander the universe in eternal torment. Their minds, separated from their bodies, had become trapped in a state worse than death. At first, he had tried to ignore them, but their presence was inescapable. The voices followed him, hovering at the edge of his awareness, always just out of reach. They would never stop. They would never let him forget. The voices of the lost, the ones who had passed before him, trapped forever in their disembodied energy. They were his creation, his legacy. He had brought them into this fate, had opened the door to the void where nothing could touch them, nothing could bring them peace. They would never find rest, and he too would never find peace. They blamed him for their torment. He wanted to scream back, to defend himself, to explain that he had never meant for this to happen. But his voice was gone, swallowed by the void. All he could do was endure their accusations, the relentless reminders of his failure. After hundreds of years drifting in the cold emptiness, Miles's sense of identity had frayed to the point where it barely existed. The thought of who he once was, of the man who had created the Solace Engine, who had been part of a thriving humanity, seemed like a story someone else had told. He wasn't sure if he remembered his name, or even what it had felt like to be human. But Earth was still there faintly, lingering like the last ember of a fire that refused to go out. It was the only thing left that kept him tethered to the past. Even as his memories began to blur into incoherence, he would always return to the familiar sight of the planet, flickering below him in the vast expanse of space. But time was cruel. Even the Earth that once gave him comfort now held only a morbid sense of finality. The meteor came without warning, a monstrous object streaking through the blackness, its fiery tail lighting up the dark expanse like the herald of oblivion itself. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, an eerie calm, the endless void hanging in suspended terror. Then the impact. Earth, his Earth, the last fragile link to his existence, shuddered as the meteor collided with it. The ground cracked open, and fiery rivers of molten rock poured forth, tearing through the continents like a wound too deep to heal. The atmosphere burned away in an instant, the skies choking on the eruption. The vision before him rippled in his awareness like a fading echo, an image both distant and intimate. The chaos unfolding on Earth, the firestorm, the cracked ground, the sky burning away, was not new to him, though it had been so long since he had seen it. It was as if he had dreamed it before, years upon years ago, when he was flesh and bone on that very planet. He could almost feel the weight of the earth beneath him again, hear the wind that had once whispered through his hair. But those memories were fractured, lost to the infinite stretch of time he had spent as nothing more than energy, drifting through the vast, cold emptiness of space. 1,000 lifetimes had passed since he'd left that world behind, and yet this destruction, this end, felt like a long-forgotten truth he had once known. A cold, creeping realization crawled through his mind, the pieces of the puzzle snapping into place with terrifying clarity. He gazed at the shattered world before him, flames licking at the remains of everything he knew, and then something shifted deep inside. Oh, so that's it, he thought, the weight of truth pressing down on him. It was all just a dream. He exhaled slowly, the air thick with the stench of smoke and ruin, and closed his eyes. A sense of finality washed over him, as though the nightmare had reached its end. He whispered to the dark void. A slow, eerie smile twisted his lips as he whispered, "I'll close my eyes and wake up. Finally. Salvation. Finally."